research. We're going to be talking about researching for publication, writing, that sort of thing. Not the snarky internet version. Just to be clear.
Also, we can't really help you with your history paper.
No.
I can, but I won't.
Thank you for your honesty. All right. So we're going to get started with introductions and a brief, please keep it brief, description of what it is you do that needs research. And we'll start over here on this end.
Oh, me. Hello, my name is Christina. I am best known as CM Alongi. I am a science fiction and fantasy author and content creator on TikTok, best known for my Cafe Latte series about a cafe run by fairies, which required a bit of research because I wanted to go back into the old Fae lore, because sometimes what's really old can be really new if it's been forgotten and left out of the mainstream for a few centuries. I have also had to research different demographics as I will put in various characters that do not share identities with me, like there's a very popular Muslim character on there, there's a few different queer identities on there. I'll often end up talking about relevant contemporary issues, like when Gaza got started, talked about that, and I had to do my research on that so I didn't get canceled on the internet. So it's kind of an ongoing thing that I do research for, just for the TikTok content, to say nothing of the book content.
Hi, my name is Hario. I write mostly young adult, new adult paranormal, and fantasy. So I am currently working on a master's at the University of St. Thomas in creative writing and publishing. So I have to do academic writing for that. So it's actually a really good program because you have to do, like, you do your workshops, but you also do, like, analyzing English literature and stuff like that. So you can kind of have your toe in both worlds. But as far as what I write, it's pretty much my own world with, vampires, girls, and all that. I have a short story published in an anthology called The Vampire Connoisseur, which is called, the title is Red Angel. And kind of our work in progress is a story about a girl who is a teenager with PTSD and superpowers, and then there's another one which is about a vampire who runs a punk rock club, but who's also spying on the other vampires.
We'll get back to me since I'm the moderator.
Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. I'm Stephanie Cranford. I write romance primarily. I have a historical romance with lesbians and boats coming out in 1 month on August 3rd. It's a novella. It's only 99 cents. It's on Amazon. You should buy it. And I've also got some kind of a deconstructed Ruritanian fantasy romance on the board. Not romantasy, the old version of the words. And yeah, I am by training a lawyer and a music historian. A little bit of both, so I'm used to research.
Hi, I'm J.R. Dawson, and I am a speculative literature writer. Mostly write fantasy. So my novel, First Bright Thing, came out about a year ago, and I had to research circuses and World War I and World War II and queer culture in the 1920s and how trains work. And because I can never be, do something that doesn't make me spend way too many hours on Google, I also have to research for my second book, which is coming out in a year, which takes place all in Chicago in 2005. And is talking about if Lake Michigan was the river Styx. And so I had to look into different traditions of death with different religions and cultures. And yeah, even the short stories, I just had to do a bunch of research on how to put a puzzle together and how retirement works for a short story that just came out a couple days ago. And I also teach the world building class at Drexel University in their MFA program. So yeah.
All right. My name is Becca Justiniano. I write as Becca Patterson or Misty Carlisle. And I have a varied educational history, starting in geochemistry and moving on to ASL interpreting, with a brief stint in theatrical arts. Yeah. And then, since I quit going to school, I've continued to do research on things like microbiology, evolution, physics, more geochemistry, more into biochemistry, all sorts of stuff, because that's the kind of things that come up in my writing. Because my characters tell me, yeah, we're going to do this, and then I have to figure out how this works.
Don't you hate it when your characters are smarter than you?
Oh my gosh, always. I write also all over the gamut. I have science fiction, young adult adventures, paranormal romance, urban fantasy, some of the spicier stuff that I really probably shouldn't be talking about before 10 p.m. And most recently, I just wrote a children's bedtime story from the Klingon perspective.
Nice.
And that one, I don't know if I will ever publish it, but if you want to hear it, it will be read during Klingon Story Hour tomorrow night at 7.
Okay.
All right, so, research, it's about getting the facts right. How important is that to each of you?
I mean, I have a bachelor's in history and social justice, so it's kind of drilled into me that it is important. But having said that, I don't ever need to be an expert on these things. I'm here to tell stories, not teach astrophysics. So I never go for, I need to be an expert. I just go, is this thing that I want to happen in this book plausible? And if the answer is yeah, sure, maybe, then fine. I have what I need. Goodbye.
Anyone else?
I'm also, I mentioned, I went to law school. So the problem with lawyers is that they have to know all the facts and then they have to kind of work with them a little. But if, basically it's one of those, if your client isn't telling you the truth in the first place, you're screwed. Anyone who's watched like 0.5 episodes of Law & Order knows that. But it kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of how you, in a way, how you can work with, historical facts. Like, well, we know this person did this. You're like, yeah, but that doesn't tell me what he did Saturday night. So there's all sorts of ways that you learn how to work with the facts. I guess it sounds like I'm talking about, lying and making things up, but frankly, I'm a fiction author, so I am. But there's ways to make sure that you know that the facts, you know what the facts are, but you can work within them to make something feel not just plausible, but plausible to the reader. I like to focus on respecting the people who have come before us and the people who are going to be reading the book. Or watching the show or whatever story medium we're using. So most of my research has to do with time and place. And so that's a little different than science and math, where what is the truth behind the time and place of history, and whose history are we learning? And so I like to think if there's something that would be like historically accurate in the way that I'm telling this story, but would be harmful to somebody reading it, it might be like a triggering word or something like that, then I will find a way around it. And I think that the authenticity isn't as important as somebody having their experience while spending time in your world. But I also have seen things that just really don't care what the history was, and it makes it really unbelievable and takes you out of it. So I think that it is really important to honor what has come before us as well.
That's why I can't read historical fiction, because I will see all the things that they got wrong and go just, no.
Yeah, my bachelor's was in women's studies and Chinese, and then there's a bunch of stuff I'm like, you cannot do research. I'm sorry. Especially like some Chinese historical stuff. But I mean, I would say, like when you're doing a world that you're creating, yeah, I think there is a little bit of acceptance of diverting from historical fact, but you do have to have it within certain parameters. And also I think doing research is sometimes, research can be a rabbit hole. I think all of us acknowledge that. But also, like, if you read through this one thing, you might find out about this other, like, there might be a paragraph in this one book about this other thing that you're like, this is a whole novel.
Keeping it.
I keep stumbling over those story ideas.
I love it. You put it in your notebook, you write it all down, and then you get back to it later.
Yeah, I will say, I did have a professor who recommended you always keep a reading log of both like your fiction and your nonfiction, because if you can't remember where you got an idea from and you have to go back later, like especially if you're going to write anything from, obviously academic, you need to cite everything. But I mean, even if you're writing nonfiction article for non-academic, you need to be able to say this is where that idea comes from.
Yeah. Bibliographies for like fiction are like one of my favorite things ever. Unlike my colleague, I do read a lot of historical fiction, historical romance, and the best ones have afterwards where they just give you like, I don't know. It's one of those, there's a book by Eloisa James that has an absolute jerk of a doctor in it who's doing like brilliant things, diagnosing people who have never, like, we don't even know what this illness is yet, everything. And in the back she said, so I went to my research assistant and said, can you find me some sort of like historical context that I could put house in this story, house 15. And the research assistant came back and said, there was this guy named, and I don't remember what his name was, but he was involved in some of the early scarlet fever research, and rumor has it that he was in fact a giant jerk and also a giant genius. And she's like, perfect. So, it depends on the quality of the historical fiction I will give you. And I would, obviously I'm going to sit here and say, and even though some of them may be genres that are more known for not including as much history in their stories, doesn't actually mean that the people didn't do, hours and hours and hours of research on the back end. Or paid someone else to do it if they're New York Times bestselling authors, but whatever.
And I would be less annoyed, like with R.F. Kuang's Babel, she wrote a foreword that basically said, she adjusted the dates of like when the college was, like Oxford was even founded, or certain streets, like very little tiny details. She acknowledged them right out the gate, like I purposefully got these wrong because I needed them to work for my story. Mm-hmm. And that automatically makes me feel like, okay, you at least know what you're doing and you're coming out the gate with, obviously it's a fantasy story, so it's like, right there, it's like whatever. But, coming out the gate with the corrections, quote unquote, that you're making, and that automatically makes me feel just so much better, because it tells me that what everything else you did is probably going to at least feel authentic. And it was.
Yeah. One of the things is, when you're doing world building, there's certain aspects of physics that you have to get right. Gravity pulls things down towards the center of mass. That is an important thing to keep in mind, because water flows downhill unless you have a very good reason otherwise. Like a very strong pump or a wizard. And things like that. That's one of those you don't really have to research, because everybody knows that water flows downhill. But there are other aspects of physics that if you're writing teenage space adventures, you still need to get the physics right to a certain extent to keep it plausible, to make it feel real.
There's a really great world building course in Masterclass or something like that by N.K. Jemisin. Mm-hmm. And like one of the early episodes after you get past the here's why I'm doing this stuff, which I think takes up like 2 episodes or something, it's how to literally build a world. Like you start with, here's your globe. Okay, find your equator. Just for the record, on all planets that we've managed to detect this on, winds flow towards the equator in a particular way. And even going back and starting, even going back and starting with a particular, just drawing your circle map, and then when you put your continents on it, then you can figure out where they are in terms of the wind, and even if it's, an ice planet or whatever, some places will have more and less habitability, et cetera, so forth. So even when you're completely designing a world from scratch, unfortunately, certain laws of physics stay true unless you have a good reason to break them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And if you can't afford a world-class thing like from Jemison, there's a YouTube channel called Artifixian, which does basically the same thing.
And that brings me to my next question. What are your go-to sources for your research when you're for fiction?
So I weirdly like to start on YouTube. When I started doing research for books, I kind of had like grown up watching like a documentary with David McCulloch where like he goes to the National Archives and he's like, I've read 700 books and I climbed up the stairs to where John Adams, blah, blah, which is also really cool. And like, I love like going on, when I can afford it, going on trips to the places where things are taking place or where something has happened. That's super cool. But my go-to is a little more down to earth where it's like, okay, I have this character who is a first responder and I need to know like what their training was. A lot of training videos are on YouTube for free. Or if I have a character who's like super into a certain type of literature, but I've never really read those kinds of books, I'll go on and like watch like a one-on-one, and then kind of branch from there. So it was kind of hammered into me, don't use YouTube, don't use Wikipedia, like when we're in high school and college, like, you know, go for the big sources. And I'm like, well, those are my best friends.
Especially when the Wikipedia page has like the bibliography
Yeah.
at the bottom for further research, that is incredible.
As a tutor, I have pissed off more than one teacher by telling their students, go ahead and start with Wikipedia, just don't use that in your paper.
Yes.
Go to Wikipedia to get a basic understanding of what you're looking at, and then go down to the resources, use those.
Yeah, I think.
I was going to say also, if you're lucky, there's different quality pages on Wikipedia. We all know this, but if you find the one that was edited by the guy who has the PhD in the extremely niche subject, then you're probably going to get some primo sources out of that.
I mean, the big question is, how much do you know about the topic before when you start researching? If you know absolutely nothing, then usually the goal is, okay, just something that gives you a broad overview, like this period in history or this topic. And so libraries are awesome. One of the things I like to go to is there's the great courses, which you can get. I've gotten all of mine through the libraries, but like I said, that's really good to give you a broad overview of your particular topic. If you have like the Libby app through your library, you can download to your phone and listen to it. Although with that one, I have a hard time finding like there's a booklet they give you with it. If you can physically get a copy from the library. In a booklet, they might have a bibliography page, and like I said, that's a good place to look for sources, to look for further information, and then you start getting to the specifics.
I still really like to. Go ahead. Go ahead, Jerry.
Well, I was just gonna say it depends largely on like what it is that you're researching. Like if it's something on like the physics or scientific part of it, then yes, some Googling that's kind of all you need. But like if you're researching something like for my novel Citadel, the main character is autistic. I am not. So in addition to that basic research, like what is autism? Like what's the spectrum look like? What are all the possible symptoms I can give her, and how would that affect her personality and plot? You also, what I like to call more human research, which is like going to, my favorite is Facebook groups, but you can also go to like Quora and Reddit and find those groups, communities of those people that are open to allies and ask your questions. They're like, what is it like? Like, what does a meltdown feel like? What's the best thing about this? What's the worst thing about this? What is like, do you mask at work? Why or why not? And you'll get like a huge wealth of information that way that will arm you with knowledge, help you see the world in a better, through better eyes, and then also like give your stories a really good human touch.
The other way to go about doing that is go to your favorite cat-based group or what have you, your interest-based group that you're in for your own interest, and just say, hey, is anybody here willing to talk to me about fill in the blank? Mm-hmm. And I've done that. I've never had the moderators mad at me because I ask people to private message me if they're willing, and then the conversation isn't in the group. It's just one-on-one with people who are willing. Because it's amazing how many physicists actually love cats,
Are there any physicists who don't want cats? Why would
It's
you
like-
not want cats?
But you know, it's like, it's like also, you know, it's like finding people from other cultures with a shared interest. It's really easy, and if you're respectful of the group rules and just say, I need to talk to somebody who knows about this, please private message me. You get an amazing amount of response.
Yeah.
And then you have private conversations with people who actually know this stuff. And if you're looking for things like cultural context, that's probably, you know, the best way to go about it. It's like, yeah, how do Muslims deal with, you know, feel about animals in the house? Ask a Muslim. Ask several of them, actually.
Yeah, no group is a monolith. The more people you ask, the better.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I like to interview people, and so that's funky that. Yeah, I think that it is one of the least favorite things of most introverted writers is to talk to people we don't know. But just like looking up online, like I really wanted to talk to a death doula for this upcoming book, and so I looked online and I was like, hey, can we meet? Can I buy you a coffee? And there's been some really wonderful adventures that I've been able to go on by, like, I shadowed a ghost hunting team one time. I got to go, like, behind the scenes of like an old war museum. Like, people are like, oh, you're writing a book? Oh, that's super great. Hey, come on in. And they tell you all of this really cool, amazing stuff. And then you have a connection there, too, that then, you know, when the book is closer to publication, you have somebody to look at it if they have the time. And that's when we get into authenticity and sensitivity readers.
Sensitivity readers are big. And like, you know, I feel like there's this, I don't know if it's because I'm introverted or if it's something that everyone struggles with, but there's like this hesitancy to ask what you think, what would be basic questions in their field, because if you don't want to feel like an idiot. But at the same time, it's like, you can't learn unless you ask, and they're like, a lot of their, very few people are going to be mad about you asking. Like, for one of the books I'm writing, Heart of Iron, the main character gets arrested twice in as many days. So I needed to know a bit about police procedural and like, what are some things going on just from the cop point of view, and how would that work for missing persons, and like all that stuff. And in my hometown, there's this outreach program called Coffee with a Cop, where one of the police department goes and like, you know, it's hosted by a cafe, and I just went in there with my notebook full of questions, grabbed like 5 of them, and it was just like, I need to ask you questions for a book, and they were just like, tell us your questions, like, what do you want to know? What's your book about? And I was like, oh, it's about fairies.
It's amazing how much people really like to nerd out about their particular topic. Like, yeah, okay, I'm sitting here at a nerd con and talking about how much everybody is a nerd about something.
Yes.
Absolutely everybody. If you find that thing, you can learn a lot.
Just talk them into an info dump. It's so good.
Yes.
Yeah, just throw a couple questions and let them go. Oh, cool. What? Okay.
I need you to slow down real quick while I write this down.
Yeah. But yeah, you get people on their topic, and they will go and just keep going. And oh my gosh, the amount of information you can get from that. And not just about that topic, but about the culture surrounding that topic. Because there is a culture to physics labs.
Absolutely. And on top of that, while most people aren't willing to, you should never treat, as we mentioned, any individual is not a monolith. They are not the only autistic person on the planet or whatever, you know, so it's always great to find extra sources. That having been said, if you think there's one physics-loving, you know, cat-loving physicist out there, there's probably 20, and you might be able to talk to 3 of them.
There's also like this thing that makes you excited and makes you nerd out. Like, I think that sometimes we can look at ourselves and be like, oh, well, there's nothing to write about in my life. I'm just whatever that likes or whatever. And it's like, well, actually, no, that's really interesting. Like, I'm a teacher and I really love theme parks. And so I really love to write about teaching because it's something that not everybody has done, and like things that I take for granted, like is not common knowledge for anybody who isn't in education. And then like theme parks, I'm like, oh, nobody wants to hear about theme parks, and it's like, yes, but I want to, and that means that all of my research time is going to go to like travel blogs and like how do, you know, patents work, and what was the first theme park, and how evil was Walt Disney, and like all this stuff. Very,
Yes. There's this guy I follow on TikTok whose whole passion, and he's built a career out of this, his whole passion is flying on airplanes. Not traveling, not visiting different countries or whatever, just the flying on airplanes part.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he loves to, especially if it's first class. So like, and that's what he loves to do, and he's built his whole career around it where they'll give him a free ticket and, you know, he'll review the airline.
There's a lot of people who do that on trains too, especially all over Europe and in Japan and all that. And it's like, you're literally just following along with the dude on a train, or the one I'm thinking of is a dude, but you know, there's a random gender.
Is it Airplane Facts with Max? Is that his name? Who like, he tells you about how the airplane is built and then will go off into a tangent about Lord of the Rings?
I can't. I think it's a blonde guy with glasses.
Yeah.
Yeah, somewhere. Okay, yeah, but yeah, no, and I'm just like, that was like the most boring, I mean, I say this as a bookworm who loves an excuse to just read or write for 6 hours at a time. Like, that is the most boring part of the entire trip, and that's what you get most excited about. Okay, so like, you know, and if you were to get him started on an airplane, he would not shut up about it. So you're not bothering people, you're not troubling them if you ask them a place from genuine ignorance about their special interest. They will love the opportunity to info dump on you.
Of course, this brings up the question of vetting your sources. How do you go about it? How important is it?
So it's extremely important. The best source, of course, is like something that you visually saw with your own eyeballs or something. And since you cannot do that, for example, I cannot transport in time back to 1818. That is not going to happen. Ideally, in theory, you would have, you know, a video of the same source. Again, can't do that for 1818 or any other year, probably till about 1920-ish, depending. And we all, a lot of us learned like how you prioritize sources in school, and it's always, oh well, the first person source is best, and then the like high academic prose source version, the one you get off of JSTOR, which by the way you can get free if you have a Hennepin County card, or any library card that you can attach to Hennepin County. So technically I have an Anoka County card, but in any case, you know, there was all of this, you know, hierarchy that we learned, and honestly, like, some of it's not true. The best thing to do, of course, is to look at a broad range of sources. So if you go into Wikipedia, you're going to get footnotes. Those are probably going to be the academic sources in most cases. Sometimes you'll get like magazine articles or blogs or websites or something, depending on what exactly your source is. And then the next thing, if you like, for example, if you're watching videos with people on YouTube, which unfortunately is a thing I don't do that often, I don't really like listening to things for research. Then you have to, sometimes it's hard to figure out on YouTube exactly the person's qualifications or whatever, because we've all heard stories about people, you know, faking things or whatever, but there's usually, you know, you've got to make sure that even if you have what looks like a valid first person narrative source or something, you've got to vet that, which unfortunately is either more Googling or looking at another source and, you know, going, oh, they contradict in a way that is not compatible.
And eyewitnesses are not necessarily the best sources.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so much research about how much eyewitnesses get wrong, but there's always going to be that personal slant.
Yeah.
I think also like, what is the bias of the first person, of the person that you are interviewing or the person that you are reading their text?
Who's funding them and who's...
Yeah, you know, there's a lot of, one thing that I ask my students to look at is like, when was this person writing this? Why were they writing it? What are their biases? What are their privileges? And what was it, like, I think 100 years ago, the like #1 book on like Asian history was written by a white guy who had gone there for like a week. So just, you know, be careful. And I also have like a horror story, like doing everything exactly right, and then, I mean, it's very low stakes, it's not that scary. But I had to figure out where in my book this circus was gonna land in this town called Lawrence, Kansas. And so I went down to Lawrence, and I stood in fields, and I asked locals, and I went to the history museum and talked to like the guy in charge of the history museum for the history of Lawrence, Kansas. And he's like, oh yeah, it would definitely have been in this field in this year. And I was like, thank you, sir. And then I wrote it in, and then the copy editor came back and was like, that field was not a place that existed in this year. It closed 15 years beforehand. And I was like, oh, so I did all that for nothing. Great, awesome. So just like, even if you think that a thing is correct, like double, triple, quadruple check it through different avenues.
Multiple sources.
Yes.
And look for the consensus.
Yeah.
I mean, the science, the truth of science is in the consensus. One experiment isn't going to tell you much of anything. It's going to say, this experiment did this. You add it to all the other ones, and if they all have pretty much the same results, then you can say, okay, this is pretty much true. But, you know, one of anything, it is just one data point. And it's, you need to figure out what the whole pattern is. So, yeah, get your eyewitnesses, but then, you know, check the maps. Check the historical records. Check, you know, it's like, did that building actually exist at that time? Because if it didn't, then their story is at least a little bit wrong.
Yeah, no, when I was doing the autistic research, you know, one of the articles, one of the sources that kept popping up with every single thing that I Googled and looked up online was Autism Speaks. Ooh, yeah, and even back then, before I knew much about it, even back then I knew like something was sus about them. So just what you do is, you know, you type in quick check is you type in that source, you know, in this case, Autism Speaks, controversy, scandal, you know, those types of words, and then you'll come up with just source after source after source. You know, if there's nothing there, there's nothing there. And that's a pretty good sign, but not in this case. In this case, it was like, you know, all of these people saying like, here is why Autism Speaks is not a reliable source for autism and why it does not speak for autistic people in general. And it's just like, okay, so now ever since then, even though they tried to clean up their image a little bit, like anytime an Autistic Speaks resource pops up on whenever I'm doing this type of research, I never click on it and I never look at it because I don't even want to try. So there's something to be said about, like, you know, like you said, get the consensus, look around, and if everyone is saying that this source is bad because of X, Y, Z, ignore the source. Or use it and then disprove it.
But you can also, it's also sort of, if you find a source and it is disputed, you can also, like, for example, if you Google, and, shoot, I'm gonna have to pick on Autism Speaks again, I'm sorry. If you Google Autism Speaks controversy, you get all of that information and you read through it, and it turns out that it did not in this case. But it turns out that it is like one disgruntled employee who's been writing, you know, op-eds for places that publish for pay, that sort of thing. You know, you can't just look up controversy and say, oh my God, there's 12,000 results or something, and then that's when you get the judgment call. Also, even bad sources can have not necessarily good but interesting information. Mm-hmm. So like if you're reading something and it is like horrifying, and you're like, wow, that is the most racist view of history of it. One example, like I was reading a book about some early Muslim Indians who came over to be students at Oxford in the like early 1800s, and it was basically the whole book was written from the point of view of this guy who's like, look what I discovered, isn't this amazing? It's like you discovered a thing that was cataloged in the British Library for the last 200 years, thanks. But there was still a whole bunch of information that I could pull out there and cross-reference with something else.
Yeah, when you're looking at like racist archives, like stuff from 100, 200 years ago, focus on the action, like physically what they are describing, and kind of throw their interpretation of it out the window.
Yeah. The other fun thing you can do is when you find that kind of stuff, is have your character respond to it. Like if you have your autistic character in a world where autism speaks is there. You know, another character can say something that comes from autism speaks, and your autistic character is like, oh.
Because do not use those words in this house.
Yeah, no. Or the racism. You know, like, respond to it. It's fine. The thing is, you know, it's like, yes, make sure you know. But yeah, looking up autism speaks controversy, and you get that huge long list. You still have to look for consensus, because if it's one person, it's still just one person.
Yeah, you gotta look at all the sources. Another thing that I've seen, because I like to watch history videos just in my spare time, like History Tea Time with Lindsay Holiday, Extra History, OSP, you know, and so I really like to look through the comments. I know they say never look at the comments on the internet, but a lot of times if it turns out the myth that they're saying was from this indigenous tribe from, you know, pre-colonial age, and it turns out that it was actually an original story written in 1970, someone's probably going to point that out in the comments. If they're seriously misrepresenting a historical event in history, the people who live in that area or you know, are descended from that type of people are probably going to say something in the comments, and they're probably not going to be happy about it. So that can, and obviously it's all internet stuff, so you got to be a little wary about, like, you know, who is right, you know, which version of the truth is the most true. But like, if there's a bunch of comments on there from different people, and they're, especially if they're being replied to, and it's just like, you know, this is, you know, not what happened, or this is just a weird interpretation of this, or, you know, that type of thing, then it's something to be aware of, and it's certainly something to look further into.
Which brings up, of course, the big huge elephant in the room, AI research.
Oh, yeah. Well, you can remember, we have an attention economy, so it's just about getting those clicks, getting people to look at it. And the thing though is, if something's free, and we're kind of using a lot of stuff for free, good research takes time. It can take access to records and things like that, so it also can take, you know, a lot of money. And the irony is like the people who are just shelving out the free stuff, like, they're not trying to make money off the information. It's for some other, usually it's for some other agenda. I was going to say a story is, one of my professors, she had a class on teaching ecofeminism. And so they actually had a big thing was they wrote a paper and, you know, submitted it to a journal. And so this is, you know, information, the whole idea is they wanted this out there, free access to it. The journal said, well, if you want this to be open access, which means people can access it without a subscription, it's going to cost $4,000, which they didn't have. So it's a lot of those academic journals, it's through like JSOTR.
Just JSOTR,
yeah. It's like, and usually you can get them through the library, but a lot of those aren't. Some, like, if you aren't going to find it if you just Google it. Probably not.
Somebody said that they didn't believe in the human soul until they saw AI, and I think that that's pretty fair when it comes to AI. I'm very much, as a writer, as an artist, as somebody who loves to consume art and pay for art, and support our libraries. Like, I just feel like AI is not the way to go, fam. If you're going to get your history information from an AI source, you're going to miss a lot of nuance. I mean, we've been talking about like the human connection when it comes to our sources, and also double checking, quadruple checking, and it's going to make it a lot harder if you start with AI. I just don't think that's a good idea.
It also means you have to watch out that other people aren't using AI in their research.
Yeah. AI is sneaking its way into a lot of places because there are people with a lot of money riding on it who want it to be used instead of people. And so they're sneaking it in even though it's not ready It's not doing what we need it to do. It's not, nobody's asking for it. And yet they're pushing it really hard and they're sneaking it into places. I don't know how many times I have to tell my Gmail, no, I don't want you to help me write this email.
Yeah.
I can write my own darn email. Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
spell check is one thing, but yeah, no, and one of the best ways to avoid AI is to read physical books. Like, especially if it's for historical, research, but like honestly, like whenever I can, because I spend so long staring at a computer screen anyway, I try to go for physical books myself just to read that. And you check the author, like are they qualified to talk about this? Is what I'm doing now for a video where I want to talk about the history of fairies, the myth of fairies, and how it has evolved over the centuries. Because I get asked a lot of questions about that, like, how do you know all this stuff about fairies? I'm just like, I just Googled it. So I want to like actually do, okay, let's trace where they came from. And so I've been getting and reading these actual physical books. That means there's no AI interfering with them, and a lot of them are peer-reviewed or they're original sources. So it's a lot safer to rely on them.
Although, of course, books still are subject to the historical changes in.
Oh yeah, no, they're not perfect, but it's usually a safer bet than a random article that someone can whip up in 20 minutes.
They've been vetted. I've read 3 separate biographies of Mary Wollstonecraft, and the first one was written in the 1890s, and it is so Victoriana. Like they keep talking about, oh, she was the perfect woman and the greatest wife. She was none of the above. She hated having children, and she was madly in love with several men who didn't want her and was not a big fan of her husband.
That reminds me, I was researching Charles Dickens, and one of the first places I went was his biography, but he picked out who was going to write his biography, and it was his bestie. And so it starts off with like, Charles Dickens was the best man to ever walk the earth. And like, that's not a direct quote, but that's pretty much what it is. And Charles Dickens was, spoiler alert, not the best man to ever walk the earth, nowhere close. So yeah, you definitely have to see when it was written and who was writing it.
The one from the 1970s was also entertaining because it was clear that the person who wrote the 1970s biography of Mary Wollstonecraft, one of the early feminist icons, absolutely hated the whole concept of 70s feminism. So that was a really entertaining read. But I mean, it's one of those that if you can see the bias, you can still get things like you get sort of like the feelings of the thing. You can obviously get bad facts or good facts from a bad source.
Yeah, and like documentaries are a bit of a mixed bag as well. So just be careful. If you're more of a visual person, just be careful with those. Check the sources on that one too. Even if they're interviewing experts, video editing can go a long way to warping whatever agenda.
One of my guilty habits is I watch debunking videos. So like people will go and find the bad documentaries and go, and here's the splice where you can see that this person was going to go on about this, and now they're answering an entirely different question.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, okay. It's made me a whole lot wiser about, how to look like, yeah, cuts, video cuts, cutting facts in books and that kind of stuff. What facts you include and what you don't include, how you say things, they all make a difference in, it's like, and everybody has their biases. Everybody has their purpose in writing, and you need to be aware of those so you can see where the gaps are. Because an awful lot can hide in those gaps.
I was gonna say, I'm a public radio junkie, so with radio documentaries, you don't get the visual element, but there's a lot of good vetted documentaries out there.
If you have a question, remember to use the colored paper because our moderator is blind.
Oh, not entirely.
But she cannot see your hand. She
I
can
will
see
not,
the paper.
I promise I want to see. Green, way in the back.
Okay. One really useful thing for making JSTOR work for you if you aren't a millionaire is academics are allowed to send you copies of their paper. if you find their email address and say, hey, I'm writing a thing, I saw you wrote this paper, could I get a copy? Academics are allowed to send you copies of their own work. So you can get access to a
Okay,
paper.
just to put it into the microphone so everybody can hear it, comment is, if you're not a millionaire and can't afford to pay for a lot of the research papers, go to JSTOR. Even if all you can see is the abstract, you can usually get the email address of the lead author. You can ask them and they will almost assuredly, most of them are very happy to send you a copy of their paper. They are totally allowed to do that.
And somebody might read their paper.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, somebody wants to read my paper? Oh, heck yeah, here you go.
There you go. And contacting professors of universities that like specialize in whatever field you're going into, asking them for like sources or like, you know, like, hey, I'm writing a book about such and such and there's a scene that involves, you know, this, that, and the other thing, you know, can you recommend me some good, reliable sources to get to get some ground on? And they will most, like half the time, because they're very busy, they will respond with a nice long list of here's what you need.
I remember I had a small question about immunology for one of my books. It was just a teeny tiny little piece of the book, but I wanted to get it right. So I contacted a professor of immunology over at the University of Minnesota and said, I'm writing a book about this, it has this little issue. I'm wondering if I could take like 10 minutes of your time to dig down into it so I get the facts right for what I'm doing. And he's like, well, sure, why don't you come to lunch? I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna turn down lunch. So I headed over to the University of Minnesota. I ended up in one of the faculty's cafeterias with 10 biologists. Who were all like, we heard you're writing a book, can we help? Yeah.
That is a great problem to have.
It was wonderful.
Another way that kind of thing works as well is going to university websites, looking for specific classes, looking for syllabi. They often list textbooks and other sources, including research papers that are written for the teaching of that class. Yeah, you want to do a little research if you look at 20 different classes and this one book only shows up in one book. But it's a good way to get started anyway, to find some potential sources of information on particular sites.
Okay.
Also,
hold on one second because it's about to start dribbling out my ears. To repeat for the microphone, great way to do this is to go to university websites, look up course catalogs, and find the syllabi for courses about what you're looking for, and check their sources. But again, check more than one, because if a book only shows up in one, it's probably not the best source. Okay, continue.
And the other thing is looking also at some of the online teaching, like Khan Academy and something.
Yes.
Sometimes they have a lot of online books, but occasionally they will refer to other references as well.
Okay, it's also with the similar cautions and recommendations for the online stores like Khan Academy. Am I accurate? Okay. Blue.
Yes. One of the most egregious incidents of not doing your research I ever came across was this mystery writer, Tony Hillerman. He had Minneapolis and St. Paul 300 miles apart.
Oh, that's worse than getting them mixed up.
Gas station, obviously.
Oh,
Of course, I'm a Virgo with Virgo rising. They have to go together. I have to have continuity. I read the first 15 pages. No, I can't. They kill it. Yeah.
Okay, just in case anybody missed it, the comment was about bad, do your research. An example of not doing the research is the author whose name has now left me,
Tony Hillerman.
Tony Hillerman, had Minneapolis and St. Paul 300 miles apart. And that kind of doesn't work very well to those of us who live here.
There's a very famous opera by like Massenet or something called, I think it's Manon in the Spring, that has the main character dying in a desert in like Alabama-ish. And I mean, I know the book that the opera was based on was written in like the early 1800s, but I feel like we filled in some of that now.
Yes. Seriously. One of the funniest instances, personally, for doing my own research was I went on a road trip recently with my brother and his girlfriend because one of the big scenes in my story takes place in northern Minnesota, a Black Beach specifically, and I'd never been there. So like, I'm gonna go there. Liam, did you want to come with me? Yeah, sure, bring me, like whatever. So we go, and before that, I had a scene where it's a fight scene that takes place on a bridge halfway between here and there. And I saw on the maps, there's a bridge, it goes over what looked like a thick river. The city is called Pine City. It is like geographically exactly where I needed to be, like, you know, all that stuff. So I thought, great, we'll use the route that my bad guys are going to use, so that way I just need to get a look at this bridge to make sure that it's gonna work, everything. And I'm expecting, I grew up in Hastings, which is right on the Mississippi, so I'm kind of spoiled. We had this nice, huge river, big bridge that spans across it, so that's kind of what I was expecting when I went there. We were on 35, it's a highway, it was fun. No, it was like a little 330-foot bridge, just a 30-foot bridge. It was like boom, boom, and I'm just like, were the signs right? And like we had seen the signs, you know, Pine City, 20 miles, Pine City, 10 miles, Pine City, 5 miles. Okay, great. We're definitely gonna see that bridge, and it's, you know, all these signs. It's definitely going to be. I need to make up a whole new town. If I want this scene to work, I need to make up a whole new town and a whole new river or lake if I want this, or else I'm gonna have to rewrite the entire middle of my book. And I ended up going with the fantasy option because there are fairies and dragons running around. I can make up a city if I want to. And it was just, and my brother would not stop laughing.
That was your problem there, you brought witnesses.
I did.
Yellow something or other.
Side maybe?
It's a side eye.
Okay, yeah, I can't tell.
No, it's fine.
It's yellow.
How do you get in contact with people like law enforcement if you are writing a story that takes place in another state and you don't really have the resources to go to said state?
Look at their website. I would say there's usually a community liaison contact.
Or they have like a PR department. I mean, that's who you contact. Hopefully you will get an actual real life police officer and not somebody intended to make the police look good.
Yeah, a lot of, you know, I guess it depends on what your story needs. Like if it's just like how does police procedure work, you can contact any member of law enforcement and they'll tell you pretty much the same thing. But if it's specific to like there are certain laws in this state that and their enforcement is what's causing, you know, the plot to go or whatever, then yeah, contact them directly. Each police precinct is going to have its own website, or it's going to be listed under the district website. You can also contact, if you can't get in direct touch with them for whatever reason, they're not answering your emails, it's in their spam folder or whatever. You can also contact the public officials, like the mayor or the city council member, especially if it's a small town. They're going to have more of a bandwidth to talk to you about that and get you in touch with the right people.
Yeah, in my experience, local officials are usually really approachable.
Yeah. City ones, not so much, but you know, they're jerks.
Yeah, I've never had much of an issue once I explained that, yeah, I'm writing a fiction book, I want to get the facts straight, with getting in touch with the right kind of official. And it can sometimes take weeks, and, you know, it's like, but yeah, I have had to talk to a homicide detective from Kansas City, Missouri, to be specific. And it took a while, but once I got actually in touch with the community liaison in Kansas City, Missouri for that, they said, oh, sure, we'll find someone who will call you. About a week later, I did get a call from one of the homicide detectives from Kansas City, Missouri.
I will add that if your questions have anything to do with something that they might not want to answer, like racism, then you're going to get a lot of stuttering and hanging-upping. And I mean, that happened to me where I had to call a town about, you know, would in 19 whatever, would this character have been allowed in this hotel? And they're from two different sources were, I have to call you back, okay, bye. And I didn't have
that with Coffee with the Cop too.
Yeah.
Yeah, those kind of answers though are very telling.
Yes. Also, if you want to know more about, for example, if for some reason you're trying to contact someone in the field or something, also defense attorneys are a really good source on how terrible cops can be. My sister-in-law's been a defense attorney down in, a public defender in Iowa for 15 years now, and there are places you're like, yeah, I can't go there. Why? Because that's the cop bar or the cop restaurant or whatever, and they hate me because X, Y, Z reason. And she's in like Story County, Iowa. If anybody knows where that is, I will be a little surprised.
Yeah, I mean, another place also to look at, you see if there's any local media. I know a lot of local newspapers have been going bankrupt, but if there is one that exists, that's a really good source.
Any other questions? Blue in the back, or green in the back, yes.
When you've done a whole ton of research, how do you keep it out of your story so it doesn't bore your reader? Like,
Only include what's relevant to
Hold on 1 second. Repeating for the, how do you keep all of the research out of your story so that it doesn't bore the reader?
So, like, what you're asking is how do you do exposition, which has haunted authors since the dawn of storytelling. There are multiple ways to do it. One of the biggest ones is just only include that which is relevant to the story. You might have 99 facts about the Silk Road in the 13th century and how the Mongols completely mucked it up in the next century, but you only need 2 of those in the story. You will almost certainly know more than what's going on in the story, and that's fine. Just goes with what's relevant to the plot. And then in terms of like actually delivering that information, there are a bunch of ways you can do so. Like you set it up as a mystery, like what The Matrix did with What is the Matrix? The first third of that movie is a mystery. Another one is what's called The Pope in the Pool, where it's like, it's just a conversation, it's dialogue, it should be boring, but it's done in such a weird, outlandish way. The Pope is in his underwear in the pool telling you about the Silk Road. Like, you're gonna pay attention to that. So there are a bunch of ways to do it, but it literally does come down to just figuring out exposition, how to deliver it, and what is relevant to your plot.
I always think of it as a game of hide and seek. I've got all this information, you don't. But I'm going to tease you about it by showing it here. And it's in things like, what color shirt was the heroine wearing? What road did they walk down? These kinds of things. What did they smell? That kind of stuff. I don't have to sit here and tell you, it's like, I am telling you all about the Silk Road. I can go, like, yeah, they went from here to here to here, and these people were there.
I think it's also, what is the purpose of your story and who is your audience? So if we look at like Moby Dick by Herman Melville, he's got a lot about sperm whales. Why though? Because he's trying to save the sperm whales.
That was a 600-page book that really only needed to be 300 pages.
Maybe 200. And if you look at Great Gatsby, like his purpose was to talk about the hypocrisy of the late 1920s. And so he has a lot more detail in there than if it was a romance book and it was just about Daisy and Jay Gatsby. And also, does your audience know the perspective of the character that you are writing? Or are you trying to educate your audience on something that they may not know? And how do you handle that? So I think that it really, if you just look at like science fiction, for example, like as a genre, like you have hard science fiction where people want to read about how the robot was made, and then you have soft science fiction where it's like, I don't know, it's just a magic robot. It talks and things and learns how to love. So I think it really depends on what genre you're writing and why you're writing it.
For example, it's the same way with any other exposition. I will say my biggest suggestion is to write it all into the story and then take it out in the next step. it's easier to sometimes it's easier, when you wrote the whole story or whatever, or the novel, and then you put it away for 2 weeks or a month or whatever so you can get the refresh, and then you read through it and you're like, oh, I do not need those 6 paragraphs about sperm whales. Okay, that's fine, I can take them out now, but it's so hard to know while you're actually doing the writing unless you are an extremely special kind of writer, which I am not. I had something else to say and I completely forgot it, so it must not have been important.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, I came up with this metaphor to clean my house top to bottom, is when you're vacuuming the carpet, you have to move something aside so that you can vacuum underneath it, even though when you put whatever it is back, they're not going to see it, but you need to move it aside to vacuum underneath it so you can get the corners, which is the part they are going to see. So think about what's the stuff they're going to see around the corner that you need to include. And I would just, in general, characters would be the guide. What is relevant to the character? What does the character care about, good or bad? What will affect the character?
And unfortunately, we are now out of time, so we'll do very brief closing thoughts, starting on this end this time.
Oh, hi. Are we doing like where to find us or closing thoughts?
Whatever closing thoughts you want to have.
Do your research, like it's really important. And this is my book. Thanks. You can find me on most social media. It's Steph Cranford. That's half of my first name, all of my last name, and StephanieCranford.net. My closing thought is really, it's not just the big things, and also research the things that you think you know. Like if you feel like you know a whole bunch about, and oh God, I'm sorry, I'm gonna pick on Mercedes Lackey for a second. She's been musical for years, right, and everything. And in one of the books, she wrote something about a D minor diminished chord. That does not exist. It's either a D half diminished or a minor 7 flat 5, or possibly a fully diminished chord. But in any case, that was a detail that she thought she knew, and so she put it in her book. And look, I have this really cool detail. Sometimes even the things you think you know, you don't know, so look those up too. Double check yourself.
Yes, don't be a lazy writer. Just gotta check it out. As for where to find me, I have a blog. I haven't updated in a while. Called Darkest Not Evil.
Never pretend you're an expert. Always consider yourself a student, and your life will be much more wonderful and eye-opening and easy. You can also find me on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and I have a website, cmalongi.com.
And thank you very much. Remember, please volunteer, and we will see you at the next panel.